Hello and welcome to the Hibernation podcast. My name is Dahyo, and I'm inviting you to join me for a weekly conversation with some of the amazing artists who've decided to stream with us over the course of the festival. Before we start the show today, we'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the custodians of the land upon which we stand. Wherever we are in this country, Indigenous sovereignty has never been ceded, and we must be mindful that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. As we share and explore music throughout the festival, we are also on a site that carries the reverberations of many centuries of music and cultural making. Joining us this week is Freya Howard. Freya is a filmmaker, writer, musician, and innovator with a love for connecting transdisciplinary dots. They've spent the past 5 years working in a range of films, music videos, and web series, jumping predominantly between assistant directing and production design. Freya has a love for contradiction and subverting audience expectations, and also a deep interest in the things that influence our lenses of experience. Since 2017, Freya has been working in transdisciplinary teams to solve complex problems with creative methods as part of their degree in creative intelligence and innovation, particularly delving into design thinking, systems thinking, and alternative economies. More recently, Freya has been diving back into storytelling. The focus this year has been on rediscovering what makes a good story, the parameters of storytelling, and the ins and outs of imaginative immersion. How are you, Freya?
Hello, I am good, Dahyo. It's a nice sunny day. I've made a little veggie garden over the past week, and my little seeds are getting some sun. I'm hoping that they get well fed and grow.
That's fantastic. I think looking after plants can be really therapeutic, especially nowadays, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so, sun is good in that case. So we're recording this on a Friday, which means that your stream is in 2 days. How are you feeling about all that?
Sure is. Look, I'm feeling good, I think. I have historically felt a little bit stressed about it over the past... probably like last week. This time last week, I was a little stressed, mostly because I'd left a couple of things to the last minute. Namely, I had not tested OBS, the streaming software that we're using, and I was like it. A lot of my project hinges on it being able to do certain things, and I hadn't confirmed whether or not it could do those things. But I have tested it, and it's fine. I've now shot a good chunk of the pre-recorded stuff that I'm using. So that's good. It's looking good. It's feeling good. It's been a fun time. I am feeling reasonably at peace with it, whatever it will become.
I think that's a good mindset to have 2 days before, you know?
2 days. I just for some reason my brain was like, yes, it's soon. It is on Sunday, but it hadn't registered that, it's 2 days.
Oh, it's okay. I'm sure it'll be great. You talked about your pre-recorded and pre-filmed stuff, and
Yep.
I've heard your pitch. I would love to talk about that in a second.
Yep.
But firstly, let's just get some background. So you have quite a bit of experience working as a filmmaker, correct?
I have a reasonable amount of experience as someone who is breaking into the industry.
Yes.
Or is it like at the beginning of their career?
But you are interested in film in general, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's my thing.
What is it that sort of I'm forgetting my words now. What is it that sort of drove you to film in the first place? What did you find interesting?
That's okay. I am not 100% sure, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I've always been someone who loves writing, who loves creating worlds, who loves creating feelings and shifting the way that we see things, and creating atmospheres. And when I was younger, I used to act a lot. I did drama classes outside of school and inside school, but I never... and I also did photography a lot. I really loved taking photos and, again, creating atmospheres. And I kind of never considered any of those as viable career options because I saw them as too unstable. And then right near the end of high school, I was talking to a friend of mine who I'd catch the bus home with. And she was talking to me about how she wanted to be a filmmaker. And she would tell me about her script ideas and we'd talk them through. And the more and more I talked to her about it, the more I kind of went, actually, maybe that's what I want to do. And so I just kind of decided that I would start studying that, which was completely opposite to all of the other things I thought I would go on to study, which was like I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I wanted to be a vet, and then I wanted to be a lawyer again, and then I thought about social work, and then I thought about something, I was going to do just a general arts degree, and then, yeah, decided out of the blue to do this, and haven't looked back since.
Yeah,
So,
well,
yeah, I guess like why I like it is because I love creating atmospheres. I love creating moods. I love creating stories. But that's not necessarily what drove my decision at the beginning.
yeah. Do you feel like the medium of film, in terms of, you know, you've got the edit, you've got potential animation stuff, you have sound design, you have music, you have acting. Do you think that this medium of film that brings a lot of things together, do you think that assists you with your sort of ideas of creating atmospheres and all of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So something that has also deeply aided my trajectory as a creative person, and as just a person in general, is the fact that I did this double degree. I didn't just study like film, media arts. I also studied creative intelligence and innovation, which is basically like transdisciplinary problem solving. And that transdisciplinarity, which is basically, it's the idea of bringing together, not just bringing together different forms of knowledge and working in teams of people who are from different disciplines. It's also about transcending those boundaries of discipline and working across disciplines yourself, and being able to think in different mindsets in a like quite holistic way, and a way that like, yeah, so you're kind of never thinking in just one discipline, you're always borrowing and combining bits and pieces from different places. And so that has, I think, fed into always the way, or like, you know, as I've kind of developed as a person over the course of the 4-year degree, that's how I see projects at the get-go. And also that also like kind of feeds into the fact that I've always been a bit chaotic and a bit unable to commit to one thing. I always need to be doing 5 things at once. I always need to be doing everything at once.
Yeah.
Which obviously is sometimes often counterproductive in film, because you can't do everything at once. But you can understand how all of those things come together and use that to shape your own job that you're doing.
Yeah. So it's not purely, you know, a lot of the time when we talk about interdisciplinary stuff, at least, we are talking about a collaboration between a couple of people. So, for example, I wrote a score for a good friend of both of ours, Ashlyn, for her film.
Yes.
And I wrote the score for her, so I was bringing my sort of experience with writing music, and then you know, giving that, because she didn't write music. So that's that sort of collaborative process, cross discipline.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is also sort of not necessarily collaborative. It's also just a personal approach.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's highly, I mean, you know, collaboration is a key part of transdisciplinarity, because you can't know everything. So you need to be able to rely on other people. But it's about cross-pollination of ideas, and it's about, if you are collaborating, it's about working together, not just in your siloed things and then kind of putting it together at the end. It's about being able to expand your own knowledge across those disciplines, and use that to influence your own discipline. So it's like, it's working with adaptable rules, and working in yourself, with kind of adaptable, ever growing, emerging, kind of understandings of different.
So this sort of idea of versatility, I guess, is also really helpful for creativity, because you know, you might come up with one idea that wouldn't fit neatly into the boundaries of, at least in sort of creative things, because that's how I generally think of things.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't find an idea that would, you might find an idea that might not necessarily just fit into film, or might not fit into music. It's like something that is a nice sort of blending of the two or more different disciplines that you're thinking, and that can create sort of interesting and original ideas.
Yeah, kind of. And I mean, like, in any circumstance, when you're creating something for a certain medium, you do have to create it for that medium. You know, if you're grabbing an idea and turning it into a piece of music, obviously you have to play by the rules, or at least be aware of the rules that make music engaging, that make music have the effect that it has, and the limits of that. And the same goes for when you take that same idea and put it in a film. You've got to be aware of what film can achieve, and work to those strengths and weaknesses. But often, to make a project more holistic, more diversely influenced, you don't want to limit yourself to those rules, in that you want to try and find ways to incorporate alternate kind of forms of knowledge and understanding and ways of doing things, to see if you can make your own project better within these confines, or like better understand maybe what confines are more confining and what confines you can make, what like walls you can jump over a little bit or work around.
Yeah. So it's not like you just can't know it. You can just not know anything and just throw things at the wall and see what happens. But
it's kind of in if anything, it's about learning. It's about constant learning.
And that is never a bad thing. So so I mean, okay, so talking about collaboration and sort of adapting to new mediums and all of this sort of stuff, I guess that's a nice little smooth segue to to the stuff you've been doing with us through the festival. So
yes,
a few things. So before we talk about your upcoming stream, I'd just like to quickly bring us back to the Art in an Hour stream that you did with me.
Yep.
A while back now. God.
It was like a month ago, yeah.
Yeah, God, time has gone fast.
Yep.
So in that, we tried to do some sort of, it was very rudimentary sort of attempts at live filmmaking and collaboration over the internet. But I think that was, I mean, personally, it was just interesting to work live and under pressure with someone who is working in a discipline that I have not much experience with at all, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that I really learned a lot through that. Partly that trying to stream a video in DaVinci Resolve before it's been rendered out leads to a frame rate of like
that was
half a frame a second.
Absolutely janky. It was not good.
That's all right though.
So sorry, I didn't mean to like interrupt. I also feel like I learned a lot from that experience. It was a good reminder for me of how much you can actually get done in a certain amount of time, and how much you can't get done in that time, and how to manage that. And also I think it was a good prototype for live streaming in general, because that was the first time I'd ever done that. But a prototype for this, because I think a key thing in the creative process that I just always forget is practice and prototyping and experimenting and editing things over time through many kind of iterations. And I'm glad that I did that with such a gap but before my stream this week, because it allowed me to kind of mull on the kind of instincts that I developed as a result of that, and the things that I'd learned about creativity.
Yeah. Do you find, okay, so for me as someone who predominantly works with music, and I have a fair bit of experience doing sort of live gigs and that sort of stuff. The first time I did a live stream was last year in the first lockdown for season 1 of Hibernation. Damian asked me to do a live stream, and as a musician, I didn't find that transition too difficult, because, I mean, yes, it's a different feeling performing into a computer and a webcam and a microphone versus being in front of people, but the actual act was not too different. I just had to set things up, press stream, and then do my performance as I normally would. Do you feel like as someone who works in film, which is not a live medium, this sort of transition to live streaming has been a bit more of a sort of challenging experience?
Yeah, I think it's been challenging in not necessarily like the negative definition of challenging, but it's been a challenge in the kind of exciting definition of that word, in the sense that it's served as a really good opportunity to have a think about what can be achieved in a live stream format, what has been achieved, and how can I interrogate storytelling using these tools that I've never used before. So one of the first things I did was I kind of got a whiteboard marker out, and I went to my like mirror, as I tend to do because I don't have a whiteboard, and I started brainstorming. Okay, what can you achieve what's unique about the live stream format? What are the unique capabilities? What do I understand? What do I already know, having watched live streams, having known like a bit about the technology? What do I know now? And then I also brainstormed, okay, well, what kind of stories can I tell using that? What can I do only using live stream, as opposed to pre-recorded cinema or music or whatever else? What is it unique to this? And I was particularly focused on storytelling because that's something that it's kind of been on the forefront of my mind this year in particular, because I think I've needed to circle back to what actually makes a story, makes an effective story, how I tell stories. And I'm teaching myself to tell stories again, really, from scratch, because I've had this huge writer's block for the past few years, getting increasingly worse. So I kind of started brainstorming, and then I was like, well, something that you can do with live streams is you can, and what, given the limitations of lockdown as well, when where I've kind of only got me. I've got my roommates who have helped actually with this, mostly shooting bits and pieces, but they don't act, and they kind of can't really act and probably wouldn't feel comfortable on camera. So it's just me. What can I do with this? And so I was like, well, what if I merge together pre-recorded and live components, so that maybe I can have multiple characters. I can interact with myself. I can shift the way that a story unfolds using these little kind of scenes, these little windows. Maybe I can take a story that might have read one way as a film and see how it reads if I break up the structure a bit, and break up the kind of format through which it's told.
Yeah, I really like that idea because it is a really interesting sort of merging of live stuff and pre-recorded stuff, which I always find interesting.
Thank you.
I mean, you have it a lot in music with samples and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. But this is sort of more because this is really, I think you are sort of drawing attention to that divide. I don't want to spoil too much.
Sure.
But from what I have, I'm just trying to think of what I can say, but you have sort of two perspectives in this story, and one of the perspectives is told through the use of pre-recorded videos, and then the other one is done live.
Yeah.
And I think I find that idea really fascinating because I think it's using the technology. It's not sort of trying to hide the fact that it's a stream. It's like embracing the medium. And I think that's quite good because sometimes when I'm just doing a music stream, sometimes I feel, oh, is this just like a gig, but not as good. But I think that a lot of the streams that I've really loved have been streams that are, that aren't trying to be anything different. That they're being like, yes, this is a live stream, this is the format, this is how I'm going to use it.
Yeah. And I think it adds like something that I think fascinates me about live stream is the sense of, well, it's the expectations that the audience comes to live streams with. It's the idea that it's live. It's to an extent raw. Like obviously you're still performing for an audience. It's still curated on the spot really. And you do have a little bit of a plan, but there is the expectation that you're talking without editing. You're talking without necessarily like you're not like changing what you say in retrospect. You're not crafting in retrospect. And so I thought it would be really an interesting experiment to see how that changes the way, how those expectations change the way that a story then, which is pre-recorded really, pre-planned, pre-scripted, how that changes the way that an audience interprets that. And also it kind of links to the fact that this story it's like it's me, but it's not me. There is, I've had to kind of balance up or weigh up to what extent I can be seen as a person in this piece of art. And I think that's something I always think about. It's always something I always feel. It's something I always am scared of, actually. I always want to create things that are completely separate to myself because I'm like, no, if people can see me in the art, then they can see the strings and it's not good. But that's not correct. We are what we make. What we make is us to an extent. We cannot create from what we haven't experienced. So, in this sense, like something I'm playing a lot with in this stream is memory and the idea of memory and the idea that memory can be a conversation in your head with yourself. That conversation changes the way that you maybe perceive memories. It changes the way that you tell memories to yourself and therefore how you see yourself going forward. And memory is something that's always a little bit on the back of my mind. It's something, I mean, like I did I did a whole honors thesis in it last year and the beginning of this year, looking at the way that music influences memory and how that can be, and how like cinematic music can be used to shift our experience of memory. And so now, so partly because I've been doing that for the past year, my mind always circles back to memory as a way of interpreting all of my experiences now. But also partly I think that I'm a really nostalgic person, and this is a conversation that's really been in my head for the longest time. To what extent am I reliant on my memories to shape who I am? To what extent am I over-reliant on my memories as a crutch for the fact that I find it really hard to be present in the moment because of my depression, because of my anxiety, something I'm working on and making a lot of progress in. But I think I do always rely on memory a little bit in order to convince myself that I can feel because I have trouble with presence. A little bit of a tangent. Where did I start?
We were talking about medium.
I was talking about medium. Oh yeah. So the idea that this so then I was kind of weighing up to what extent should this be me, or should this be me? Should this be raw? Or should it be something separate to me? And I think what I've ended up settling with is that it is bits of me. It's versions of me. It's perspectives that maybe I kind of have experienced or jumped between in the recent past, but it's all kind of told through someone who is having an experience that I can't ever have, and someone who is in a different profession to me, doing different things with different knowledge. And the live stream format, the idea that this is live, that it's kind of unfolding organically and authentically, the perception of that kind of changes the way that the conversation around memory is read.
Yeah.
I'm hoping.
Well, look, it's live stream experiments, right?
Yes. That's the experiment. We'll see if it plays out that way.
Experiments are good because experiments, I mean, there is the risk that an experiment won't necessarily work out, but there's also the quite strong chance, and I think in this case, touch wood, But I think in this case, I really like the idea. I feel like it's going to be really effective, you know?
Thank you.
Do you think, so yeah, we've talked about how this is this sort of idea of live and how, because it's live, it feels more raw and not scripted and stuff, but it's not completely, you do have stuff that is scripted and is
100%.
edited.
Yeah.
And that, I'm really fascinated by the juxtaposition of those two sort of forms of video content, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've leaned into that and sort of tried to highlight the differences there?
Yes, I definitely have. Yeah, that's part of like, well, number one, what was that? There was like a part in my obnoxiously long bio that I wrote that you read out at the beginning of this. I love contradictions. I love playing with contradictions. I love juxtaposition. I love comparing things. And so part of how I convey this story and how I convey the little existential questions at the heart of the story is by messing around with stuff that is distinctly pre-recorded or distinctly in the quote-unquote past.
Yeah.
And how layers of editing, both literally and metaphorically, can kind of shift that and compare to, like, yeah, it's kind of then juxtaposed with the live stuff and pre-recorded live stuff, which I guess you'll see what I mean by that.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil too much. No. Yeah, I mean, how are you in terms of your stream though?
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, I'm just being mindful of what I'm saying, you know.
Okay.
I'm just being sort of I'm being careful, but
trying to be vague.
Okay, you know, let's just not talk about this straight. Let's just talk about sort of film and that sort of content in general, right?
Sure. Yep.
Do you find that your experience as a musician has shaped the way that you approach sound design and things like that?
Yes.
In film?
Yeah, definitely. It's noticeably shaped the way that I perceive sound design even over the past year. Because music has always been something that's really important in my life, but I didn't quite realize how important it was until last year when I started doing a thesis on it. It's because I've been a musician since I was very young, because my entire family is very musical and I've always just had music around me and instruments to pick up and mess around with. And I listen to music almost all day, every day, just as like a thing in the background. But I use it to evoke memories, and I use it to evoke moods related to memories often. And when I play, I often start playing music because I want to evoke something in myself. And so originally, like before last year, I relied heavily on diegetic sound. Which is sound that, in film, it's sound that is happening in the scene. So if a phone's ringing in the scene, that's diegetic. If the wind is blowing and you can see the trees moving, that's diegetic. Non-diegetic is the music that is accompanying, or any kind of sound effects that aren't happening on screen. So I used to rely really heavily on diegetic sound, and I kind of still do. Because part of me really loves crafting things from the world around me, and shifting the world around me into something maybe a bit more fantastical or a bit more collated, to create a subtle kind of mood or a subtle kind of shift in perception. But after doing this thesis, after immersing myself in music and cinematic music and experiments on cinematic music, all of last year, or for the majority of last year and the beginning of this year, I suddenly have started thinking more and more about the music that I use in film and how to use that. And so I've started, usually in the past when I've looked at a scene, I've always relied on the sounds, like I've always immediately pictured it with a soundscape that is devoid of music, that is devoid of convoluted like cues that might indicate the fact that it's contrived. But more and more now, when I think about films, I start thinking in terms of music as well. I start picturing it with music to craft that scene, to craft that mood, to craft that emotion. And it's kind of also linked then to how I understand music as like the limitations of music and the purpose that music can serve, which has changed as well over the past year, where I thought that I might be able to communicate my feelings through music in the past in a more concrete way. I've realized obviously more and more that that's just definitely not the case. You can't, like, music is so subjective, so personal that what I can do is I can create moods for myself, and I can rely on obviously the kind of neurological and physiological cues and like reactions that music causes that we've been able to track in order to create a sense of mood. And I can rely on expectations that have been trained into us through cinema, through music, through just society. But that's always going to evoke a completely different reaction in someone else. So I think that it's interesting when you're crafting a scene that has a particular, like, you know, when you're crafting a scene in a film, obviously that's more concrete. You're creating a literal experience that, while you can interpret one way or another, is to an extent defined. Yeah. Exactly. This is what's happening. These are the facts. Music then provides this extra layer where you can kind of add this like sub-narrative, this subconscious like sense of narrative, this subconscious sense of immersive emotional cueing to evoke extra feeling in that scene, and to evoke certain like, if you go into it with the intention of just trying to get someone to think more deeply and more emotionally into their own experiences through music or into their own reactions, I find that more fascinating than trying to specifically curate a concrete experience, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think an example of when music in, well, film, but like in that sort of genre, that sort of discipline doesn't work well is, like, you know, how if you watch sort of terrible reality TV and the music does a lot of the sort of emotional deadlifting.
Yeah.
Because there's not much going on.
Sure. And I mean, that has a place. Like, you know, I think the more I grow up and be in the film industry, the more I realize that, like, reality TV is a craft, even if it seems surface level and like kind of vapid. It's a craft of its own.
And to be honest, I do enjoy some surface level vapid reality TV from here and then, you know. But it is. But I think that sometimes that they have this sort of over-reliance on music to carry things. And I don't think I think that could be a bit of a trap with music.
Sure, yeah.
In film, right? Because it feels like, oh, well, if I play this sort of and I mean, you know, like, we can't precisely tell people how they're going to feel with music, sure. but it does, I think, hint in some way or another.
Yeah, you can. You know? It's basically offering suggestions, and often those suggestions are taken up because it does affect. Like, yeah, when I say it doesn't concretely affect us, obviously, like, we can predict things. We can, there are certain pieces of music that will generally make everyone feel uplifted, or they'll throw back to certain experiences or certain other, like, intertextual references to other films that we've seen in the past, and so we have certain emotional connotations. But obviously, within that, you can't really predict a person's specific reaction.
Yes. I think, I mean, you're going to have to forgive me for my very limited sort of knowledge of the film world, but I'm thinking, like, you know, I've given my example of like a bad, or sort of like a, not necessarily bad, but like a not quite so well utilized sort of use of film, use of music in film. But then I think one of my favorite movies for the use of the score is The Shining, the Kubrick movie, because he uses sort of Penderecki and Wendy Carlos and Ligeti and people like this and Bartok to hint at an atmosphere rather than say, this is how you should feel It's like it just tells you there's something that's slightly wrong here, you know. So I guess like I don't think I'd be one of those people who would say, oh, you shouldn't use music in film, and especially me as a musician, I'm not going to say that, but
yeah, just shoot yourself in the foot. Never write a score again.
I hardly ever write film scores, but yeah, but I feel like it's I really like when music is used tastefully in film, and it sort of bugs me when it's not.
Yeah, which is interesting because I think what is tasteful, quote unquote, changes from context to context. And that's something that I think I just realize more and more the breadth of that, because yeah, I too have a tendency to be like, reality TV is garbage, or even in like generic, more easily digestible films, I'm like, oh, that, you know, that score's kind of hitting you on the head a bit, it's really on the nose. And obviously, yeah, I have a preference for more subtle use of music. I have a preference for music that is in a bit of a little, like a dance. Forgive the kind of on the nose metaphor there, but there's in a little, it's in like a subtle changing relationship with the what's on screen. But there is a time and a place for those big scores, you know? There is a time and a place for that kind of on the nose stuff, like in I'm trying to think of an example.
How to Train Your Dragon made me want to be a composer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's,
but see, even that's
amazing.
Yeah, that is a good score. That is a good score. That wasn't even the kind of, like, I feel like that is an example of good scoring because that it does work with what's on screen, because you're creating this fantastical world that's also animated. So there are certain, like, it implies a broadness. There's all of these really wide shots of flying, of rolling landscapes. It's atmospheric in a really large sense, like physically. So it makes sense for that score to be large and fantastical and fantasy, you know, because that's the genre. But I'm thinking even of stuff like, I don't know, even like kind of old, I'm thinking, I mean, my brain keeps going to Back to the Future. That's not necessarily a score that I've ever felt was bad, but it's maybe closer to an example of what I might have judged as kind of on the nose, because it's those I don't know, there's like certain cheesy kind of riffs and musical motifs that come back over and over again. And sometimes I think in certain films I'm like, or even like I was watching, last night I was watching Adaptation with my roommate, which is a great film, by the way. So is Being John Malkovich, which is like linked to that film. Would recommend you watch both, probably Being John Malkovich first. But the score in that, like, it's a very kind of meta film and a very, it's a bit more arty kind of, but because it plays on tropes, there is a moment where the score kicks in and it feels very kind of generic. And for a moment I was like, I had this instinctive like, oh no, that's not the score that I would expect. However, that instinct kicked in about a minute into, or half a minute into the actual score. So, I clearly, it was working and it was like my second guessing that was like, oh no, wait, this isn't what I expected. And I caught myself and I was like, oh wait, yeah, while in the past I would have been like, oh, well, this has ruined it because you've put in something generic and something that's so arty and profound. But there is a place for that, and it worked with the film, clearly.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, also sometimes just on the nose stuff is really fun.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like,
it's a tool that you can use.
And I think if it's used well, it can be really good.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's certain Zack Snyder films that I don't think it's used well in. But yes, I mean, like, I think I don't want to sort of, and I hope I haven't, but I don't want to come across as the sort of person who's like, everything has to be used in a super clever and deliberate way. It's like, no, sometimes it's just something that works and is cool and it doesn't have to be thought about any more than that, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're not coming across as that. I'm probably also, I
okay,
know
that's
I am
good.
aware that I'm like cutting you off sometimes before you finish the points, because I'm like,
Oh,
wait,
no.
I have a realization. I have something profound to say.
I do that all the time, so no worries at all there.
Cool.
Unfortunately, though, we are running out of time.
Sure.
But yeah, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you for listening to me. Also, if anyone's curious about music and cinema, I would recommend you have a little read of the mood cue approach by... I can't actually remember the author, which is bad because I used it as a primary.
I'll put it
thing
in the video description.
Yeah, I'll chuck the actual like names. Also, you know what? I'm gonna just give a bunch of resources to you afterwards to put in the notes because I can't actually remember the names of.
No worries. So anyone listening at home, check the video description for all of Freya's resources. Also, read Freya's thesis because it was actually really good.
It's not. Oh, look, it's not published anywhere. But if you're curious, well, no, I mean,
Freya,
if you're curious, chuck me a message. I'm happy to
like
send it out. I just actually, I need to actually finish going through it and making sure that I need to spell check it properly because I was delirious when I submitted it.
I understand. I totally understand. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us. And I'm really looking forward to your stream, which is on Sunday. So if you're listening to this on the day it comes out, which is tonight. And that's not the last you're going to see of Freya because the final art in an hour is the next week. And we will have all 7 collaborators plus myself, and we'll be having a little movie night and seeing what we've all come up with over the festival. Woo. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Woo! Does that mean we get to play the final video that we made not in 1p resolution?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Shocking.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. All right. Yeah, thank you for listening in at home. We really appreciate your support. It means a lot to have people listening and supporting experimental music and experimental art in general in what is a strange time for experimental art. So thank you very much for listening in. We couldn't do this without you. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.